The night before my wedding, a restless anxiety kept me awake long after Daniel had fallen asleep beside me. The moon was a perfect, bright orb outside the window of our expensive hotel suite, casting a silvery, melancholic glow over the room's luxurious furnishings. My fiancé slept peacefully, his breathing deep and even, completely unaware of the storm raging inside my heart. I shifted under the expensive satin sheets, trying to find a comfortable position, and felt a crumpled corner of the sheet under his pillow. Hopping to smooth it out and perhaps finally find some rest, I reached down, my fingers searching in the darkness. Instead of soft cotton, they brushed against something cold, hard, and unmistakably metallic. I froze, my heart suddenly pounding a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I knew the shape of that object instantly, intimately. It was a delicate silver chain with a single, small dove charm. My sister Camilla never ever took it off. She called it her good luck charm, a precious gift from our late grandmother. With a trembling hand, I pulled it out, the cold metal seeming to burn my palm. My stomach twisted into a sick, tight knot of dread and realization. In the profound, heavy quiet of the room, Daniel stirred. He murmured a name, his voice soft and blurred by sleep. It wasn't my name. It was Camilla's. And as if to seal my fate, from the adjoining room, I heard my sister's light, unmistakable, carefree laughter. I sat there, shrouded in the dark, silent tears tracing hot, bitter paths down my cheeks, holding the damning, final proof of their betrayal in my trembling hand. My name is Arya, and the very next day I was supposed to stand in front of all our friends and family and legally bind myself to the man my own sister had been secretly, treacherously sleeping with. Everyone in our family, in our whole town it seemed, always said Camilla was the perfect one. She was older, effortlessly beautiful, and possessed a natural, magnetic charm that made people instantly adore her and want to please her. I learned from a very young age to be quiet, to make myself small, to keep the peace in a household where love often felt like a reward for good behavior, not a given right. Our mother openly and lavishly adored Camilla, seeing her as a flawless, shining reflection of herself. Our father, a quieter, more passive man, mostly seemed to pity me, watching my struggles from the sidelines but never truly intervening or challenging my mother's clear favoritism. Now, sitting alone in that moonlit room, the horrible, suffocating truth washed over me in a nauseating wave. I had been pitied my whole life, even by the man who had sworn on bended knee, with tears in his eyes, that he would love me forever. The bracelet felt impossibly heavy in my hand, a tiny, cold anchor tethering me to a devastating reality I could no longer escape or pretend away. The morning of my wedding was a chaotic, noisy whirlwind of activity that felt completely surreal, like I was an actor in a play I hadn't rehearsed for. I sat perfectly still in a plush, velvet chair as a professional makeup artist carefully applied my makeup, her brushes feeling like tiny, annoying whispers on my numb skin. Camilla burst into the room like a summer storm, radiant and glowing in her flowing, expensive pale blue maid of honor dress, her cheeks flushed with what everyone else in the room assumed was happy, excited emotion. "Oh, Arya, you look absolutely breathtakingly beautiful," she gushed, her voice catching with a slight tremor I now recognized as deep-seated guilt, not sisterly joy. When she leaned in to hug me, her arms wrapping tightly around my stiff, unyielding shoulders, I didn't hug her back. Instead, I turned my head and whispered directly into her ear, my voice low, calm, and chillingly devoid of emotion. "You left something in Daniel's bed last night." She jerked back as if I'd slapped her across the face, her face draining of all color, leaving her looking pale, ghostly, and utterly horrified. I gave her a small, cold, calculated smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Don't worry, I put it somewhere safe for you." Her hands trembled so violently, she could barely help the hairstylist pin my delicate, heirloom veil into place. I watched her struggle in the large, gilt-framed mirror, my own expression remaining serene, placid, and completely unmoved by her obvious distress. The first, triumphant notes of the wedding march swelled through the flower-filled church, and I began my slow, measured walk down the long, petal-strewn aisle on my father's arm, a serene, practiced smile fixed firmly on my face like a mask. I saw Daniel standing at the altar, looking so heartbreakingly handsome in his perfectly tailored black tuxedo it made my soul ache. But his eyes, Those warm, brown eyes that were supposed to be filled with nothing but love and admiration for me kept darting away, nervously flickering toward Camilla, who stood poised and beautiful just a few feet behind him. My heart hammered a frantic, wild, desperate rhythm against my ribs, but I didn't break character. I was the stoic, graceful star in this terrible, tragic play. I recited my vows perfectly, my voice clear, steady, and resonant, each word a deliberate, firm step on the path I had chosen for myself the night before. I pretended not to see the way Camilla's chin trembled, the way she clutched her bouquet of white roses far too tightly, her knuckles white with tension. Then, as the officiant finally pronounced us man and wife, she burst into loud, dramatic, body-shaking tears. A soft, collective, admiring sigh rippled through the crowd of watching guests. They thought they were witnessing a beautiful, deeply emotional display of devoted sisterly love. But I knew the real, ugly truth. They were watching raw, unadulterated, soul-crushing guilt, dressed in expensive, shimmering silk and standing far, far too close to the groom she had betrayed me with. At the lavish wedding reception, under the glittering, brilliant lights of the crystal chandelier, it was time for the traditional toasts. Camilla stood up unsteadily, her glass of expensive champagne shaking visibly in her perfectly manicured hand. She gave a flowery, overly sentimental speech about unbreakable sisterhood and shared, magical childhood dreams, her voice wavering with false, practiced emotion. Daniel stared down intently at his own fine china plate, his shoulders hunched and tense, completely unable to look at me or anyone else in the crowded room. When she finally finished, her eyes desperately seeking my approval or forgiveness, I slowly, gracefully stood up from my ornate chair. I raised my own crystal glass, my smile never slipping, and looked out calmly at the sea of expectant, smiling faces. "To honesty," I said, my voice carrying clearly and cutting through the festive noise in the suddenly hushed room. The kind that doesn't wait for funerals to be spoken. The room was utterly silent for a long, heavy, uncomfortable moment, then erupted in a wave of uneasy, confused, polite laughter. Camilla looked like she might actually vomit right there at the decorated sweetheart table. Our mother glared at me from across the room, her eyes narrowed into furious, disapproving slits, sensing the dangerous disruption in her perfectly planned, flawless day. I simply took a small, deliberate, savoring sip of my champagne, the crisp bubbles tasting like a bitter, intoxicating victory. Later in the Grand Hotel's opulent, marble-floored bridal suite bathroom, Camilla finally managed to corner me alone. "Arya, please," she begged, her previously flawless makeup now smudged and streaked by messy, real tears. "Don't do this. Don't ruin everything we've built. Not today of all days." I looked at her reflection in the ornate, gold-leaf mirror, my own face a mask of unnerving calm. "Why him, Camilla?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, devoid of all the anger and hysteria she probably expected and felt she could handle. Her face completely crumpled then, the beautiful mask finally shattering. The ugly, honest truth came out in a choked, desperate, broken whisper. "Because he was yours. Because he saw me, he always saw me, but he chose you first, and I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand that he wanted you more." There it was. The lifetime of subtle and not-so-subtle competition, the endless rivalry for scraps of attention, distilled into one vicious, heartbreaking confession. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't call her the names she deserved. I just looked at her, my steady, unblinking silence a deeper, more painful, more lasting wound than any scream or slap could ever inflict. Then I turned on my heel, the silk of my dress whispering against the floor, and walked out without a backward glance, leaving my only sister sobbing alone on the cold, hard, impersonal tile floor. I canceled the luxurious, 2-week tropical honeymoon that very evening. I calmly told our families and all the remaining guests that Daniel had come down with a sudden, violent, and contagious stomach bug and was far too ill to travel. People clucked their tongues sympathetically, shaking their heads and thinking it was just a cruel streak of terribly bad luck on what should have been the happiest day of our lives. I spent my wedding night completely alone in a small, plain, anonymous room at a different, budget hotel, still wearing my beautiful, intricately beaded, and astronomically expensive wedding dress. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed and scrolled through the hundreds of celebratory photos on my phone, methodically, coldly deleting every single image of Daniel and Camilla standing together, smiling and laughing, before they could even be uploaded to social media and immortalized. My mother called, her voice sharp, cold, and laced with undisguised anger. "What is wrong with you, Arya? You are embarrassing this entire family with your childish, dramatic behavior." I held the phone away from my ear for a long moment, listening to her tinny, furious voice before replying, my own voice flat, tired, and final. "You raised us this way." Then I simply ended the call and turned my phone off for the entire night, embracing the silence. A full week after the disastrous, aborted wedding, Daniel showed up unannounced at the door of my new, small, sparsely furnished apartment. He looked terrible, his clothes rumpled and his eyes shadowed with deep pools of guilt, exhaustion, and regret. He begged for my forgiveness, calling the affair a stupid, drunken mistake, a moment of profound, inexplicable weakness. He claimed it was completely over, that it had ultimately meant nothing to him, that it was me he truly loved. I let him talk. I let him pour out all his pathetic, rehearsed excuses and his grand, empty promises for the future. I had my phone recording every single damning word from the pocket of my worn jeans. When he was finally finished, when he reached out a trembling, pleading hand to touch my arm, I took a firm, deliberate step back, out of his reach. "That's exactly what she said, too," I stated, my voice calm and devoid of all emotion. Then I closed the door firmly in his face, turning the deadbolt with a definitive, satisfying click. I stood there for a long time, listening as his slow, defeated footsteps eventually retreated down the empty hallway. The profound, heavy silence that filled my small apartment afterwards was the most peaceful, liberating sound I had ever heard. The family fallout was immediate, brutal, and entirely predictable. Camilla, the masterful, manipulative storyteller, immediately began spinning a complex, intricate web of new, vicious lies to protect herself and her crumbling reputation. She told our parents that I had been emotionally distant and cold for months, that I had been the one secretly cheating on Daniel with an old high school boyfriend. Our mother, of course, believed her without a single moment of hesitation or a single critical question asked. Almost overnight, I became the family outcast, the difficult, unstable daughter, the villain who had inexplicably ruined her own perfect storybook wedding. My father came to see me a few days later. He didn't say much, just sighed heavily and handed me a check with a sad, deeply pitying look in his weary eyes. "Just move on, Arya, for your own sake. It's easier that way." I looked down at the considerable number written on the check, then slowly, deliberately, I tore the paper in half, right in front of him. I let the two pieces flutter down to the scuffed wooden floor between us. "No more silence," I said, my voice firm and resolute. He left without another word, closing the door softly behind him, and I knew a chapter of my life had finally, irrevocably closed. We lived in a small, tightly knit town where gossip spread faster than any wildfire, consuming everything in its path. Suddenly, strangers were looking at me with open, uncomfortable pity in their eyes at the grocery store, the post office, or the local gas station. Camilla played the role of the heartbroken, long-suffering, supportive sister to absolute perfection, posting vague, sad, poetic quotes and melancholic song lyrics on her heavily curated social media feeds. Daniel's small, locally owned construction business began to noticeably suffer as persistent whispers about his poor character and lack of integrity spread like a virus through the community. Meanwhile, I started seriously applying for graphic design jobs. I pulled out my old, beloved, slightly dusty camera from the back of my closet, the one everyone in my family had openly mocked as a silly, impractical hobby. I started taking pictures again, chasing the long-abandoned photography dream they had all told me was a foolish waste of time and talent. For the first time in my adult life, I was doing something just for me, building a foundation that was entirely my own, with no input or approval from anyone else. Months of dedicated, obsessive hard work finally paid off in a way I had never dared to hope. A trendy, local art gallery accepted my deeply personal photo project, which I had titled Unspoken Vows, for a small, weekend-long show. The entire collection was composed in stark, evocative, high-contrast black and white. They were silent, powerful visual stories of turned backs, empty chairs at formally set tables, and hands held just a little too tightly to be genuine or loving. When curious, well-dressed guests at the opening night party asked me who or what had inspired such intense, moving, and somber work, I just gave them a gentle, mysterious, slightly sad smile. "Family," I would say softly, and then I would gracefully, deliberately leave it at that, turning the conversation elsewhere. The single, loaded word hung in the air between us, heavy and thick with unspoken meaning and implication. It was an answer that was deliberately not an answer, and it made people lean in, their curiosity piqued, wanting to know more, to decipher the hidden code. Camilla, inevitably, came to the exhibit on its second day, drawn by the same morbid curiosity that was pulling in the rest of the town. I watched her from my spot near the refreshment table as she moved slowly, cautiously from one large, framed photo to the next, her expression initially unreadable. Then she stopped dead in her tracks, her body going completely rigid in front of one particular, prominently displayed image. It was an extreme, intimate close-up of a woman's slender wrist, the focus artistically soft, but the distinctive jewelry on it was utterly unmistakable to anyone who knew her. It was her precious Dove charm bracelet. She turned, her eyes scanning the crowded room frantically until they found me, standing calmly across the space. She marched over, her face pale and tight with a mixture of panic and fury. "What is the meaning of this?" She hissed under her breath, jabbing a perfectly manicured finger toward the photograph on the stark white wall. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my chilled white wine, meeting her furious gaze steadily, unflinchingly. "It's art, Camilla. You shouldn't see yourself in it if you've done nothing wrong." The color drained completely from her face for the second time in our tumultuous lives, and she turned on her heel and almost ran from the gallery without another word, the eyes of other patrons following her swift, embarrassed exit. After that pointed incident at the gallery, the quiet, persistent whispers in our small town began to slowly, inexorably change direction. The bracelet in the photograph was too specific, too unique, too intimately connected to Camilla. People started to remember, with newfound clarity, Camilla's dramatic, tearful performance at my wedding, and they contrasted it sharply with my own calm, dignified, unwavering silence in the difficult months that had followed. They began to seriously, openly question her perfect, pristine, carefully constructed image. The rumor mill, which had once mercilessly crushed me, now slowly, surely turned its grinding gears against her. Maybe Camilla wasn't the innocent, wounded victim after all. Maybe she was the one who had been the villain, the betrayer, the home-wrecker all along. I never confirmed or denied any of the new, salacious speculation. My continued, stoic silence became my greatest shield and my most powerful weapon, and it made people believe in my innocence and my strength more than any loud, public, hysterical accusation ever could have. Our mother, desperate for a return to some semblance of family normalcy and public respectability, hosted an awkward, tense, and mostly silent family dinner a few weeks later. I arrived looking calm, professionally put together, and genuinely content, which seemed to unnerve everyone at the table. Camilla was there, sitting stiffly and silently in her usual chair, but Daniel was conspicuously, noticeably absent. She claimed he was working late on an urgent, last-minute project, her voice thin and unconvincing. Midway through the painfully quiet meal, where the only sounds were the nervous clinking of fine cutlery against expensive china, my phone buzzed loudly on the polished wooden table. It was a text message from Daniel. The preview on the screen was clear and legible for all to see. "You were right about her. She's so much worse than I ever thought. I'm so sorry for everything." I picked up my phone, made sure Camilla had a perfect, unobstructed view of the screen, and showed it directly to her, my expression neutral. Her silver fork clattered noisily onto her ornate china plate, the sound echoing in the quiet room. She stared at the glowing, damning words, her face crumbling into a mask of pure shock and deep humiliation, before pushing her chair back with a jarring screech and running from the formal dining room in a flood of tears. My photography career began to properly, excitingly take off. The success and notoriety of the local gallery show led to a real, substantial offer from a much bigger, well-respected city gallery for a full month-long solo exhibit, a dream I had never thought achievable. I was truly, finally living my dream, the very one they had all laughed at and called a foolish, childish fantasy. Camilla's life, in stark, dramatic contrast, was publicly, visibly unraveling thread by thread. The constant, grinding stress of the spreading, malicious rumors, and the ever-increasing weight of her own crumbling, tangled lies was taking a visible, physical toll on her health and appearance. Daniel's business finally collapsed completely under the immense, unsustainable weight of his permanently damaged reputation and the loss of local clients. I heard through the relentless town grapevine that they were falling seriously behind on bills and having loud, nasty, screaming arguments that the neighbors could hear. I heard all this, and I never said a single public word. I just kept my head down, my heart guarded, and kept working tirelessly, building my new, independent, beautiful life brick by solid, dependable brick. Late one night, long after the bustling city outside my window had gone quiet and dark, my phone rang, its shrill tone shattering the peaceful silence. It was Camilla. She was sobbing so hard, so uncontrollably I could barely understand her slurred, broken words. Daniel had left her. He'd packed a single, hasty suitcase and moved out of their shared apartment while she was at work, leaving no note, no explanation, just empty spaces in the closet. He said he never stopped thinking about you, that marrying me was the biggest, most terrible mistake of his entire life. She choked out, her voice raw and ragged with genuine, devastating pain. I listened to her desperate, broken, hopeless cries, the sounds of her meticulously constructed, perfect world finally, completely shattering around her into a million irreparable pieces. When her sobs finally subsided into ragged, hiccuping breaths, I spoke, my voice soft, clear, and unwavering. "Now you know what it feels like," I said, each word deliberate and precise. "To lose something you were so convinced you owned, something you stole and thought you could keep." I hung up the phone, the silence returning, and went calmly, purposefully back to editing the high-resolution photos for my upcoming, important exhibit. The entire, sordid, detailed truth finally came out for everyone in the community to see, splashed across social media for maximum exposure. Someone, I never did find out who, anonymously leaked screenshots of Daniel's private, confessional text messages to a close, trusted friend. In them, he confessed to the entire, lengthy affair in graphic, shameful detail, laying out the precise timeline of lies and the secret, sordid meetings he and Camilla had carefully arranged behind my back. The town turned on Camilla completely, mercilessly, and with a collective, hypocritical fury. All the sympathy and support she had so carefully, manipulatively cultivated over the past months evaporated overnight, replaced by cold scorn and open disdain. My mother called me, her voice small, hesitant, and filled with a newfound, shaky regret, a stark contrast to her usual, confident, commanding tone. "Arya, I should have believed you. I see that now. I was blind." I held the phone, listening to her shaky, regretful breaths on the other end of the line, feeling the weight of her long-overdue admission. I felt no gloating triumph, no victorious joy, only a deep, weary, profound sadness for all the time and love we had irrevocably lost. "It's okay, Mom," I said quietly, my voice gentle. "I learned to believe myself." That, I realized with a sudden, crystal-clear clarity, had been the most important, the most hard-won victory of all. Camilla's short, shame-filled, disastrous marriage was officially, legally dissolved in a quick, quiet court proceeding. She moved back into our parents' house, a broken, hollow-eyed, and listless version of her former vibrant, confident self. Our mother fussed over her, trying desperately, pathetically to recreate the old, familiar, toxic dynamic where Camilla was the cherished, infallible golden child. But something fundamental and essential had shifted forever within our family structure. I noticed it during a brief, obligatory visit to pick up some leftover mail. Camilla would actively, nervously avoid catching her reflection in hall mirrors and glass cabinet doors, turning her head away quickly, as if the sight of herself was physically painful. She could no longer stand the sight of the person she had allowed herself to become, the monster her jealousy and insecurity had created. The perfect, flawless, enviable image she had spent an entire lifetime building and polishing was now utterly, publicly shattered, and she was left completely, utterly alone to handle the sharp, cutting, ugly pieces of the wreckage. Daniel showed up at my downtown studio one last, final time. He was officially, legally divorced. His business was bankrupt and gone, and he looked like a haunted, hollow ghost of the confident, charming man I had once promised to love and cherish forever. He offered to make things right, to use his dwindling connections to help advance my career, to finally, properly become the supportive, loyal, devoted man I truly deserved all along. I invited him to a nearby, neutral, brightly lit coffee shop. I listened patiently, silently to all his renewed, desperate pleas and his grand, ultimately empty promises for a future that would never exist. When he was finally finished, his eyes pleading, hopeful, I stood up, leaving my half-finished, cooling latte on the Formica table. "You already made things right," I told him, my voice even sure, and filled with a finality that brooked no argument. "You left. And in doing so, you set me free." I walked out of the cafe and into the bright, warm, afternoon sunlight, feeling a soaring freedom and a profound lightness in my soul that I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever in my entire life. A popular, glossy lifestyle magazine did a large, flattering feature on me and my upcoming major city exhibit. The interviewer, a kind, intelligent man named Leo, asked me what the core, driving inspiration behind my powerful, emotional work was. I thought for a long, quiet, introspective moment, looking out the window of my studio, before answering with hard-won wisdom. "Betrayal teaches you a brutal, unforgiving kind of clarity," I said, my voice steady. "It strips away everything that isn't real, everything that isn't solid and true, until all you're left with is your own raw, unshakable, essential truth." That line was printed in the article in a bold, attention-grabbing font, set apart from the rest of the text. It was shared hundreds, then thousands of times online, going viral within our small artistic community and then spreading far beyond. A mutual friend later told me, with a certain grim satisfaction, that Camilla had read the article the day it was published. She said Camilla had cried for almost an entire, lost hour after reading those specific, pointed words, the truth of them cutting deeper than any direct accusation ever could. The truth, once spoken aloud and set free into the world, carries an immense, undeniable weight that lies can never, ever hope to hold or contain. The cumulative, unbearable stress of the long-running scandal and the very public family collapse finally became too much for our mother's health to bear. She collapsed at home from the strain and was rushed to the hospital by ambulance, diagnosed with severe exhaustion and dangerously, alarmingly high blood pressure. Camilla and I found ourselves sitting side by side in the sterile, beige, antiseptic-smelling waiting room, united for a brief, fragile moment by a shared, primal genetic fear. The silence between us was thick, heavy, and oppressive, laden with all the bitter, angry, grieving words we had never managed or dared to say to one another. Finally, Camilla whispered, her voice cracked, raw, and stripped of all its former pride. "You won, Arya. You got everything you wanted in the end. The career, the freedom, the admiration, you won." I looked at her, at the pale, defeated, hollow shell of the sister I had once idolized and loved so deeply and unconditionally. "No, Camilla," I said softly, my voice filled with a genuine, profound pity that held no trace of gloating. "I healed. There's a very, very big difference." She looked away from me, out the grimy hospital window, fresh, silent, ashamed tears welling in her red-rimmed, tired eyes. The glamorous, highly anticipated night of my biggest gallery opening in the city finally arrived. The large, white-walled, high-ceilinged room was packed with a sophisticated, chattering crowd of people, the air buzzing with excited conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, and the hum of genuine appreciation for my work. The centerpiece of the entire exhibit was a large, beautifully printed and dramatically framed photograph of two women from behind, their figures artistically blurred and merged into one another, creating a single, haunting silhouette. One woman stood straight and tall, her head held high with unshakable confidence. The other was slumped forward, her shoulders shaking with the violent, silent force of desperate, hopeless sobs. I stood beside it, gracefully and confidently greeting guests, collectors, and critics, feeling completely, utterly, and profoundly at peace with myself and my journey. I saw Camilla enter quietly through the main door, trying to be inconspicuous. She didn't approach me. She didn't even look in my direction. She just stood at the very back of the crowded, noisy room, partially hidden in the shadows, watching the celebratory scene unfold before her, her face pale, drawn and etched with a deep, permanent misery she could no longer hide or disguise. As the successful, vibrant event was beginning to wind down and the crowd started to thin, Camilla suddenly, impulsively stepped forward into a small clearing near the center of the room. She tried to speak, to deliver a public, coherent apology to me in front of the remaining guests. But the words caught in her throat, choked and strangled by her overwhelming, crippling emotions. Instead of a speech, she broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably, her body shaking with the force of her grief and shame. In front of the stunned, silent, watching crowd and a few keenly interested reporters with their recorders running, she confessed to everything. The long-running, sordid affair, the intricate, poisonous web of lies, the deep, festering, poisonous jealousy that had fueled it all from the very beginning. It was humiliating, raw, brutally honest, and completely, utterly unplanned and unscripted. I stood frozen in place, watching her very public, total, catastrophic unraveling, my heart strangely still. I didn't feel any sense of triumph or victorious vengeance. I felt a profound, overwhelming, cleansing sense of final, absolute closure. The truth was finally, completely, and spectacularly out in the open for all to witness. And for the first time since I'd found that cursed bracelet under the pillow, it no longer had any power to hurt me or dictate my life. I never gave a single public statement or granted any interviews about Camilla's dramatic, humiliating breakdown. I didn't need to. The truth was now its own independent, powerful entity, separate from me and my story. I simply thanked my remaining guests and the pleased gallery owner, shook hands warmly with a few serious potential buyers, and prepared to leave the scene of my greatest professional triumph. I walked out of the gallery arm in arm with Leo, the kind, perceptive journalist from the magazine who had interviewed me weeks earlier and had since become a quiet, steady, deeply supportive, and loving presence in my new, happy life. For several weeks afterwards, Camilla's tear-streaked, anguished, tormented face was splashed across the front pages of the local tabloids and gossip sites, her confession dissected and analyzed. I never once spoke her name in a public forum again. My silence was no longer a weapon I consciously wielded. It was simply my hard-won, precious peace, a comfortable, protective mantle I wore gracefully for myself, and for myself alone. A full, transformative year later, I published my first professional, beautifully bound photo book, a stunning, cohesive collection titled What Remains After Love. It powerfully chronicled my entire emotional journey through profound pain and betrayal and into a strong, resilient place of self-love, strength, and creative discovery. The simple, elegant dedication page read, "To the ones who taught me, through their own actions, that truth doesn't need revenge, it reveals itself, all on its own, in its own perfect time." A few days after the book's official release, I received a plain, unmarked, heavy-stock envelope in the mail. It was from Camilla. There was no return address. Inside was a single, pristine sheet of high-quality, watermarked paper with just 2 stark words written in her familiar, elegant, looping handwriting. "I'm sorry." I held the note for a long, contemplative moment, feeling the immense, complicated weight of its stark simplicity. Then I gently, almost reverently, placed it between the pages of my own published book, like a pressed, dried flower preserving a painful, but important memory. I closed the heavy, tactile cover, walked into my bright, sunlit, airy studio, filled with my own meaningful work and my own boundless dreams, and got peacefully, contentedly back to the work of creating my beautiful life. I was, finally and completely and joyously free.